This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And this is the Creep Street Podcast. Of course, please like, rate, subscribe, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. Go to our Facebook. If you want to interact with us on a daily basis, head on over to Facebook. We have a little forum there called Citizens of the Milky Way.
That's right.
Everyone's welcome to join. You just click the Let Me In button and one of us will let you in. But every day we like to post stories and our listeners post cool stories and just kind of funny stuff, funny memes, just things that we enjoy. And we get to know the audience better. Please come join that. Be a part of that. We would love to get to know you better.
Also, I've noticed that we have gotten a lot of ratings and reviews lately on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Yes.
We must thank you so much for that. That really means the world.
Absolutely. And of course, if once a week is not enough for you, and let's face it, you're kidding if you think it is.
Yeah, you're an idiot.
And if you're new to this podcast, I hope you get ready for a world of addiction.
Yes, just raw love, baby.
Because that's what this podcast is going to do. And if you need more than once a week, you go over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast to get all sorts of goodies. Now,
that's right.
Maureen, last week we gave him The Haunting of Waverly Hills Sanatorium.
We sure did.
It was a big one.
It was a big one.
Everyone loved it. God, one of our biggest episodes.
I'm so glad that you all have been enjoying it. If you haven't listened to it yet, we recommend you go and check it out. It's a lot of fun, and it's a scary one, folks.
It sure is. But today, we're not taking our foot off the gas, as they say.
We don't do that here. We just don't. We don't know how.
We're too gassy here. We're
full of gas.
We're full of gas. There's a full tank of gas in each of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going pedal to the metal.
That's right.
Maureen, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are talking about the Devil's Pool of Australia.
Let me tell you something. This is one pool you don't want to take the family in.
That's right.
This is one pool you don't want to... Don't bring your floaties to this pool.
No. This pool is meant for looking and not touching, folks.
Yeah. And sometimes even looking will get you in trouble.
Yes. This story is a very, very bizarre, spooky, real story for you all today.
Yes. This is one of those where, it's believed by many to have a supernatural element to it. It's one of those things, even if it wasn't supernatural, the coincidence that all of this could happen, it boggles the mind. It's kind of like the Chain Strangler, where it's like, even if you take away the supernatural element, how the hell is that possible?
Right. It's weird, guys. So let's just dive right in, no pun intended, and enjoy it. Before we get started, let's go ahead and read off my sources. One was a great article called The Cursed Devil's Pool of Australia at Mysterious Universe by Brent Swanser. Then we have another article called Cursed Queensland Tourist Destination Claims 19 Lives, All But One Male by Darren Cartwright at news.com.au. And another great YouTube channel called Bedtime Stories, and they had a great video called Spirits of Devil's Pool.
You know what I like about this? Up here in the northern hemisphere, we are in the throes of winter.
It is big time winter, everybody.
On the day we're recording this, we're expecting a big old snowstorm to be rolling through Chicago tonight and through all of tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's why we thought, why don't we warm ourselves by telling a southern hemisphere story?
Yes.
Because right now, our friends in the southern hemisphere are enjoying summer.
They're just down there lapping it up, thinking they know something we don't, and that's true. They do. They know warmth. They know summer. They know the touch of the sun upon their backs.
That's right.
And I thought it was time that we gave them a little bit of a shout out.
That's right.
So get your shrimps, put them on the Barbie.
Whoa!
Get a crocodile and buckle in now. Now, our story today takes place in Babinda, which is about 40 miles south of an area called Cairns in Australia, and it is known as Australia's wettest town, getting at least 13 feet of rainfall every single year.
Hey, wherever I visit in Australia is Australia's wettest town.
Okay, you know what? That was a good one, actually, and I'll give it up for that. Pop off, my king. But this actually is Australia's wettest town in terms of rain, you silly little freak shows of the week shows.
I see.
Now, this area is absolutely gorgeous where we're talking about today. It is this incredible natural pool that has been created with like a bunch of boulders nearby and rock formations. It really is a beautiful place to behold. And there actually is a origin story of how this area came to be. Before any Westerners arrived, this area was inhabited by the Yidinji tribe. And their leader, his name was Warunu, and he was supposed to marry a beautiful young woman named Ulana. But Ulana was in love with one of Warunu's warriors named Digga, and Digga and Ulana eloped in the middle of the night one night.
Uh-oh.
So when Warunu found out about this, you can imagine that he was pretty upset.
Oh, yeah.
So he got together several search parties and set them off to find Ulana and Digga. Eventually, and unfortunately, Ulana and Digga were found and surrounded by Warunu's men. It was the warriors on one side and the Babinda River on the other side. Not knowing what to do, they decided to fling themselves off of the boulder where they were standing and into the Babinda River. Unfortunately, Digga never came back up. Once Ulana realized that he was dead, she screamed a terrible, loud, tortured scream that echoed around the valley and caused boulders to smash and create a raging torment in the water, where she would also soon drown in the white water. Apparently, after her death, the men of the Yidinji tribe would die whenever they went near the water. Some of them would say they even saw her dead face under the water's surface while dragging a man to his death.
Oh boy.
Some people say that this area, just in general as a whole, to this day, has a very unnatural allure, almost like it's trying to entice people, especially men, into entering the waters, just thinking that it's a harmless place to be. Because, like I said before, it's really, really gorgeous. And it seems like the water is very calm, it's very flat, and so you think, oh, what a great place to take a dip.
Right. It looks very peaceful, these waters.
Yes. But just a few meters below the surface, there are intense whirlpools and currents that are very, very strong. Now, the first recorded death was on June 10th of 1933. It was a man by the name of Winterbottom, and he was dragged into a whirlpool at the bottom of one of the waterfalls in this area. The authorities were never able to find a body because they thought that it got sucked down and was lodged in an underwater tunnel or crevice.
Ooh. There's so much going on under that water that you can't see. And I'm sure you'll get into it. There's crevices and these very dangerous.
Dangerous, like super treacherous and just all around, I would say, rough.
Yeah.
Now, in November of 1940, a boy named John Dominic English, he was only 8 years old, and tragically, he was yanked down and drowned, but his body was found later on. On June 22nd, 1979, a very strange occurrence happened with a gentleman named Patrick McGann. He was a 24-year-old who was there visiting with some friends and climbing along the rock faces and having a good day and just having a fun time with his mates.
Right, of course.
He was climbing along some rock formations, and he was going to jump over just a small gap in the rocks and told his friends to look over and watch. But somehow he lost all forward momentum mid-jump, like he hit a wall or something. And he fell straight down. Before his friends were even able to see him or try to do anything, he was just gone.
Like literally like there was an invisible wall.
Right.
It makes me think, I think, is it Carrie? Where like John Travolta's character, or someone, they like try to hit her with a truck, but then like it's like as if the truck hits an invisible wall before it hits her.
Right.
It's like that. It's like the guy leapt and there was just this invisible wall that he just smacked into and slid down.
It's so eerie and it's so bizarre. But that is what happened. And a rescue mission was called, and it would take nearly 6 weeks to be able to get to his body.
God. That's incredible. And from what I understand, it's not like the thing he was going to jump over was that big. It's not like he was making this death-defying leap. It was just like
a little jump that he should have been able to make, but with no problem. It was a very narrow area that he was jumping over.
Right.
Now, there was one police diver named Peter Tibbs that had a quote about this crazy and scary experience with Patrick McGann.
I've been called on 4 times to try and find bodies down there, but one of the most interesting of the cases was a young fella called Patrick McGann. We thought we knew he was in there, but we couldn't get to the body because the water is so cold, it's so deep, and it flows so fast. So 8 or 10 times we went down, and we eventually cut the logs out of the place underwater, and on the last day after we'd almost given up, we cut the last log that was in the chute, and the body floated freely. And that was 5 weeks and 5 days from the time he'd gone missing, so it wasn't a pretty sight. But it was a great relief to get the body out and satisfy the family.
So fast forwarding here a little bit to November 30th of 2008. There was a group of 4 friends that arrived at Babinda pools. One of them was named James Bennett, and he was in the Australian Navy. He was actually a sub-lieutenant. A group of his friends, they were there just having a nice afternoon, having a good time, and they saw all of these signs and barricades letting them know not to enter into the water. However, they saw some children playing in the water not far away. So they thought, well, if kids are in here, then we should for sure be fine. So they decided to forgo the safety signs and the barricades and the safety rails. And they decided to go swimming anyway. They all swam for a little while, but it was suddenly when James was pulled straight down into the water with just his hands visible from above the water line.
Oh my God.
His friends thought that it was just a joke at first, but then they saw his arms reaching up for something to grab onto. He was only a few feet down, they could see that, but they could see that he just could not swim up. It was like he was being held down by a pair of invisible hands.
That's insane. So it's like he could just barely get to couldn't quite get to the surface.
Yes, but it wasn't like he immediately was like dragged down to the bottom of this pool.
It's right. It was like it was pulling just enough to keep his head under, but he wasn't like at the bottom.
Right.
His hands could still go above the water.
Yes.
It's like if he can do, like, why couldn't he just reach the surface?
And he couldn't just tread water up.
Right. This is obviously a grown man. We presume healthy.
Yeah. I mean, he's in the Navy.
He's in the Navy, for God's sake. He knows how to fucking swim.
Right. So this was just another one of those tragic, strange occurrences that happened here in this water. A little bit later, there was a young couple that was there just sightseeing one day, and they were along one of the walkways, a walkway they were allowed to be on. They weren't breaking any rules, when they asked someone to take a photo of them. But right when the photo was being taken of them, the water surged and took them into the water. There was a man and a woman that were taken into the water by this powerful surge of water. And the woman was saved, but unfortunately the man's body was never recovered.
Wow. And never recovered.
Never found ever again.
That's
which is
wild.
Shocking.
And we're starting to see this theme here. It's all men.
Yes. Apparently, all but one of the victims, and there has been about 20 of them, have been male.
Wow.
Which is fascinating. That goes into one of these things about the story where it's like, yes, you could say that all of this is happening naturally and from natural causes. It's just a very dangerous pool.
Right.
But why is it only taking men for the most part? You know what I
Bizarre.
mean? It's so weird. There was also a 15-year-old student who was there one day on a school trip, and he was kicking on one of the warning signs of the water, and he kicked it out of the ground, and then out of nowhere slipped on a wet patch of mud and fell into the water and died.
See, and that's the thing with the guy who jumped that thing, the kid who slips, the couple taking photos. It's not like they were planning to get in the water.
No, they weren't exactly. That's what's so strange. They weren't even planning on getting in the water that day at all. It's just the fact that you're there that does all of these things. And a tourist was killed there as recently as 2018.
Holy God.
Now, people say that there is something weird going on here, clearly. People that have been around during the time of one of these accidents have said that there is a very, very sinister vibe happening at this place. That is kind of hard to explain, but that they just get the feeling that something very, very bad is going on here at Babinda Falls. It's so weird and sinister there that some people have even said that they have captured some weird things happening on film. Like ghostly faces in photos, and like ghostly faces in the water as if it maybe is Ulana's face in the water, but also maybe some ghostly figures outside of the water, like maybe those are the ghosts of some of the people that have perished in these waters.
Right.
And the brave people that do the search and recovery of the victims of this devil's pool also have seen some strange things under the water. It's very dark under there, and they've said that they've found some bodies spinning in underwater circles as if being pulled by a pair of hands.
That's weird. And you know, you might say, well, maybe it was caught in a whirlpool of some kind.
Right, and that is totally possible, but it's still bizarre.
Still bizarre, and you're going to hear some other instances where it's like, how does that happen?
It's still just so creepy to imagine that you were at the bottom or you're swimming in this dark, dark pool, and then you see this body just being twirled around in circles over and over and over again.
Right, like it's being played with.
Yes. And once again, even if it's just a current or a whirlpool, it looks scary and it's very disconcerting.
Right.
Now, this region stands on top of a group of volcanic tunnels and tubes that have been carved out by lava over time. Now, these can cause underwater currents and riptides and whirlpools like we were talking about, and they can suddenly materialize and subside again without any warning at all.
Oh boy, okay.
Bodies can get caught up in these currents and then get stuck in a cave or a tunnel, and it could be months before these trapped bodies can return to the surface. So it's like, even if there isn't anything paranormal happening here at all, that still is so fucking scary.
Yeah.
That you can just be swimming in this area that looks completely clear on the top of the water, looks very calm and flat, but then just a few meters below the surface,
Right.
there's all of this craziness going on under there that is just absolutely horrifying.
Right.
In fact, one of the pools in this area is called the washing machine because of the powerful clockwise current that swirls just a few meters below the surface.
So quite literally like a whirlpool in a way.
Right. One of the local officials had this to say about the washing machine.
They call it the washing machine, where he went in because it goes around and around. It's all bubbles, so there is no buoyancy. It's dangerous water. It sucks you under. You always see people swimming in the dangerous holes. You don't know when a flood could come down from up top.
The washing machine is where James Bennett, that was the naval officer, where he drowned. It is just such a intense area that really can cause a lot of harm. Now, this isn't the only story, though. For example, there was in November of 2014, there was a 56-year-old man named Maurice Shutter that was paddling in an inflatable raft at nearby Lake Eacham when he fell out and he wasn't wearing a life vest. Authorities looked for him for 26 days, before they finally called off the search, not being able to find him. When one day the body just resurfaced on its own 18 months later in surprisingly good condition. Now, this is because at some points the lake could go down to 65 meters. And the cold water and the fact that there were no fish that deep ensured that the body was able to be preserved in fairly good condition.
Wow.
But this kind of thing just happens all the time in this area. And like we said before, it seems to be happening to all men for the most part. Now, is this because men are just more likely to be there? Or does this have something to do with Ulana's curse on the land? In April of 2020, a young woman named Madison Tam, she was 18 years old. She was swimming in the area when she was sucked into a raging torrent and tunnel of rocks at the swimming hole.
Okay.
Or at the off-limits swimming hole, I should say. So she was just there swimming as well when she was just sucked in because of this intense riptide or current or whatever you want to call it.
Right. Okay, so that does sound kind of like what happened to all the male...
Right.
Okay, very interesting. Okay.
Very bizarre. Now, tribal elder Dennis Aki, he's of the Yindinji tribe from Babinda, said that the area is most lethal during the wet season, which is from November to March, but it has the ability to kill at any time at all. He said, and I quote, "We still believe Ulana's spirit is there, and people who dare swim there at the right time and take risks, their life will be claimed. It's particularly dangerous during the wet season. It's like a vortex in there. It can still pull you under, even in dry seasons."
Well, it sounds like people just should not swim there.
Yeah, and people continue to swim there for some reason, and it's funny, it's like, they even mention this in some of my sources where it's like, it's so bizarre and weird that people keep swimming there, but it's kind of just human nature. That people just don't think that it ever will happen to them.
Right.
So they think that it's okay to swim in there and that, or that it can't be as bad as it says it is. When they have these signs around the whole place saying like, many people have died here.
Right.
Do not enter the water. But people just still keep doing it.
Absolutely incredible. It's like even if you take away the supernatural stuff, it's still weird.
Well, good golly, that's terrifying, Maureen. And
sure is.
Let's not stop. Let's just keep going.
Okay.
Let's just keep going because...
What's going on?
I also, I wanted to add to this. And,
my God. This is incredible news.
It turns out that Babinda, the Devil's Pool at Babinda, is not the only cursed body of water in Queensland, Australia.
Oh.
But funny enough, well, not funny, this is actually quite tragic. But as I was doing my research for the second part of this show, on Reddit, I saw this was an article by an Alex Druce at nzherald.com. Body of teenage girl found in water at Babinda Boulders near Cairns. That same year, 2020, that Madison Tam died, a man named Shannon Hoffman drowned there in October of 2020. But sadly, just a couple months ago in December, a 19-year-old woman fell into the waters at Babinda and died. She fell in at about 3 p.m. on a Monday. They weren't able to find her body until about 8 p.m. the next day.
Wow.
So now, obviously so tragic. This, another woman, that's
so
now
it's actually
the second.
2 women out of the whole group.
Yes.
Okay.
And obviously we don't want it to be anybody, but I just wanted to add that in because I came across that as I was researching.
Yes.
This other,
Great intel, my man.
Of course. Well, this tale concerns a specific waterhole called Wilga Waterhole, as I said, is also located there in Queensland, Australia. Specifically, it can be found along the Barco River. Now, my source describes this watering hole being kind of like in the middle of nowhere. And unless you've heard of the legends surrounding the place, you probably would walk right past Wilga Waterhole and not even think twice about it. It's very mundane, very unassuming. But if you have heard of the legend, you'd be quite terrified of this place. Well, ever since the mid-1800s, folks have reported hearing, quote, blood-curdling screams and devilish, unearthly shrieking at night.
Ooh.
That seem to be coming from the area of the waterhole. Now, there's absolutely no explanation for it, and anyone who heard it was left terrified. Apparently, the wailing would increase in volume until it was unbearable, but then suddenly would go absolutely silent.
Oh my God, that's so scary.
An author named Bill Beatty discussed one of the most famous stories surrounding the Wailing Waterhole in a book he published in 1960 called The Treasury of Australian Folktales. And the story concerned a couple who apparently decided to build a shack by the waterhole back in the 1890s, and here's what he wrote about it.
A new hand employed at Ruthven Station built a slab and bark hut near the waterhole. He brought his wife to live there. She was a typical bushwoman, sensible, practical, and accustomed all her life to the loneliness of the outback. The couple had been there for a short time when one night the husband arrived home late, having been delayed, to find his wife in a state of collapse. She could tell him of nothing she had seen, but the most appalling shrieks had come from the waterhole. He felt she had imagined the cries of some nocturnal bird to be ghostly shrieks and yells. Soon after this episode, the station hand was away for 2 nights. On arrival home, he found his wife hysterical. Crying and sobbing, she told him of the terrible screaming and wailing at the waterhole that had caused her to almost lose her reason. He arrived at the hut early on the morning of his return to find that his wife was in a semi-demented condition. Again, she told between fits of hysterical sobbing, of shrieking and wailing and screaming from the waterhole. Forthwith, he took her away from the hut, and after that, no one ever lived in it again.
Wow.
Now, this is about, keep in mind, this was, published in 1960, about something that happened in 1890. But what's interesting is that same author, Beatty, who had written that book, he actually had written about Wilga Waterhole before in an article that was published back in 1947 for the Sydney Morning Herald. This incident also apparently took place in the 1890s, and it concerned a group of, some of my sources said 2 shearers, some said 3. But they decided to make their camp one night by the waterhole. Well, they had heard about these legends, and they thought it was a bunch of hooey, but they thought, hey, if it's not, we'll get a little freaky experience out of it. Why not? We're tough men.
Oh, wow.
So they set up their camp, and here's apparently what happened next, according to that article by Beatty.
Over a roaring log fire, they sat and swapped stories and waited, their skepticism growing with each hour that slipped by. About 11 o'clock, a wild bellow brought every man to his feet, and the party spread out to see what manner of beast had uttered it. There was laughter when it was found that the bellow had come from an old bull wandering in the neighborhood. Billies were put on the fire, and the panacea for all bush crisis was brewed. After drinking their tea and smoking and yarning for some time longer, it was announced by one man that midnight was almost with them, and that if anything was going to happen, it would, following all ghostly tradition, happen soon. It was unanimously decided that once midnight passed, all would declare the ghost of Wilga Waterhole to be non-existent, turn into their blankets and sleep. Midnight passed. Not even the voice of the old bull broke the bush silence. Accordingly, yawning and stretching, the shearers put away their pipes, rolled themselves into their blankets, and settled down beside the dying fire. Every man was soon asleep. None of them heard the first distant wail. But in a few seconds, as the wailing increased in pitch, every man was out of his blankets and on his feet. Suddenly, there came a soft, distant wailing that grew rapidly nearer and louder. The cries appeared to be in different keys, devilish, unearthly shrieking, such as no human voices ever uttered. The screaming, now ringing in their ears in deafening pitch, was coming from the waterhole. The shearers thought their eardrums would burst, but they were too terrified to move. Then, to their fervent relief, the shrieking diminished in volume until it was merely a weird wailing. Moments later, it ceased utterly, and once more the bush was deathly silent. When the men told their story at the shearing shed, it was received with derision by most, but others mentioned that the Wilga Waterhole was a notorious spot, and that the Aborigines always avoided it. Some of the old shearing hands said that horses were scared of it, and drovers admitted that they never could get cattle to rest there. There were instances where cattle driven from distant parts had arrived there almost exhausted, but had stampeded at sundown.
Wow. Now that quote mentions animals having an aversion to this place.
Right, which is classic, as we know, Creep Street.
Apparently, even birds wouldn't go near the watering hole.
Even fucking
Even fucking birds. And it's not even their game. It's not even their fucking thing. They don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Horses and cattle will refuse to go anywhere near it and have been known to break down, like if they are in a fence or whatever, will break it down to get the hell away from it.
Really? Wow. So it's like they really don't want to be near there.
They don't want to be there. In 1942, a publication called The Long Reach Leader recounted a story concerning animals at the Waterhole by a rancher who said this.
I do not believe in ghosts, but I have heard the screams which have been so much discussed wherever Western men congregate, and I know for a fact that stock will not camp on the banks of the Wilga Waterhole. On one occasion, I tried to camp a mob of old cows quite close to the waterhole. Most of them were milkers, and I thought that nothing would frighten them. Everything went well until about 9 p.m. Then they started to rush and ring. In the morning, we were a good 3 miles from camp. The horses had also made a break during the night and were found badly wrung with the hobbles, standing shivering in a corner about 5 miles from the camp.
So, Jesus, they really do not want to be near this thing.
Wow, really do not.
It reminds me a lot, and this is something this is something that gets suggested a lot, and we will do it. Gosh, now it's making me want to do it. Maybe I'll do it this month. Who knows? Even though this is something different, we're talking about water sources. It reminds me a lot of Mel's Hole.
Yes.
Or just Holes to Hell. Even though we're talking about water here.
It does remind me of that too. It's funny you say that. I was actually thinking about that too. For those who don't know what Mel's Hole is, basically it's just this big old hole that people don't really know what is going on. And we'll just hang tight because we'll do an episode on it at some point for sure.
Well, there's many theories as to what's all behind all this weird stuff, all this wailing. Well, obviously, many people believe it to be ghosts. There's some specific ghosts that are said to haunt the area. One legend maintains that a boundary rider went insane and killed his wife and children, and that the wailing sound is the sound of his ghost wandering, lost in the area of the waterhole, probably mourning what he had done. There's a legend also of a young man who was robbed and murdered with his body being thrown into the waterhole and that his spirit haunts the place. But another legend involves a woman who is said to have lived in a shack by the waterhole who apparently went mad and murdered her son. The wailing sound, supposed to be, according to the legend, is believed by some at least to be the ghost of this woman mourning, like the boundary rider, what he had done, mourning what she had done to her son. Now, did the ghosts come first, or is there something about this place that drives people crazy?
Right.
Yes, there might be ghosts there now, but was there something already off about the place?
Right. I was wondering that too.
Strangely enough, there's actually some evidence about this, possibly where a woman who murdered her son, an author named Phil Shields, had done some research into the place and wrote this.
I was surprised to find the ruin of the building that was mentioned in the story. The hearth and some of the fork bears which held up the little stockyard still remain. Bits and pieces of discarded rusty horse gear litter the site. Even a greater surprise was that there are 2 graves down a ways from the ruin. Local legend has it that these circular graves are the final resting place of the mother and her child. The grave perimeters are ringed with hand-hewn ancient weathered wooden stakes. One is larger than the other, and Ruthven's owner are quite sensitive to possible damage that visitors may cause the graves, so please be respectful.
Now, I'll end on this because this is another episode.
Oh my God.
Some think that maybe this wailing is the doing of the infamous Australian cryptid, the Bunyip.
Oh.
The Bunyip. He's kind of, from what I understand, it's their version of like Bigfoot. Not necessarily the same as Bigfoot or like Bigfoot,
right,
but he's like their star cryptid.
Okay. And what's his deal? Do we really know?
There's been a lot written on the Bunyip, and we'll do some.
Yeah, we'll do an episode.
But yeah, very fascinating stuff there. But Maureen, thank you. You know, I just tacked on some stuff there at the end that I thought kind of went along with your story.
Yes, and Dylan, thank you for doing that, because what a damn pleasure it has been.
Absolutely. Real quick, and I'll give you my sources real quick.
Yeah.
Just here at the end. 2 articles here. The Bizarre Haunted Wailing Waterhole of Australia by Brent Swanser at Mysterious Universe. And There's an Aussie Waterhole with Screams Coming Out of It by Brown Lotus at Medium.com.
Thank you for that. That was all incredible stuff. And thank you all so much for joining us today and for listening. It really has been a pleasure.
It sure has. Now, you know what? Obviously, if you're getting into the water, be safe.
Yes.
Keep an eye on your loved ones.
Wear a life jacket.
And, gosh, I'm thinking about some loved ones right now.
Oh, yeah.
Do you mind if I just say those names?
Those dear loved ones that are so close to our hearts.
Yes.
And our bodies.
Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh-So-Suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, and the Sir of Sexy Sam Hackworth.
Damn, that sounds good.
Yes,
It feels good, baby.
It does. Once again, please tell your friends, tell your family, tell your loved ones. Hit us with those 5 stars, whether it's on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen.
Yes.
All right. Well, citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.